Hi everyone, my name is Sinister Skater. Welcome to the channel. If you've used a melee weapon before, since around the Ballistic Knife got added to Black Ops Cold War, you may have noticed that they feel different because every melee weapon has been changed behind the scenes in one way or another. We've seen nerfs across the entire board, although they didn't really change the rankings of how the best and worst weapons perform, except for the Machete, Wakizashi, and Ballistic Knife. Each of those melee weapons saw significant buffs and or nerfs sometime between the release of the Ballistic Knife and now. And I will be sharing all the new stats in this video to catch you up. The only reason I picked up on this and am able to do this video is because I've been testing and doing videos on the melee weapons ever since the Sledgehammer was added. And not to toot my own horn, but I'm likely the only person on YouTube that has these stats to share with you. So if that's not a reason to subscribe, I don't know what is. Please check out some of my other videos, and if you like what you see, consider sticking around. I'm trying to improve those numbers you're seeing on the screen right now. If you don't want to subscribe, cool, at least drop a like on this video. This video took a lot of time to put together. I had to retest every melee weapon, analyze the footage, and create these graphics. So let's dive in. A quick refresher so everyone's on the same page. Every Cold War melee weapon performs a little bit different due to 4 stats. We got movement speed, swing speed, time to kill, and the lunge and swipe ranges. When it comes to sprint speed, we saw no changes here. They all run at the same exact speed with the exception of the E tool that still runs 5.5% faster. There were no changes made to swing speeds except for the Machete. Before, the Machete was the same as the Sledgehammer. You could get about 45 melees in per minute. This has been upped to 55 per minute with the Machete. It's not as fast as the combat knife, but it now definitely outperforms the Sledgehammer, which is nice to see. Where we see the most changes is in time to kill, or what I like to call click to kill, the time it takes between clicking melee and actually killing an enemy. I know there's a lot of numbers on the screen right now. Don't get overwhelmed. It's not necessary to know all of this. I've listed all this data for those who want to see it. The key takeaways you need to know is that they've nerfed melee across the board. Every weapon has gotten slower, but the relative time to kill to each other is still the same. Sledgehammer is slower than the combat knife, etc., etc. Except for our boys, the Wakizashi and the Ballistic Knife. The Wakizashi got buffed. The Wakizashi Reach is the new fastest killing melee weapon in the game and can beat out the E-tool in a 1v1, which is pretty exciting. The Ballistic Knife, on the other hand, got nerfed. Its lunge time to kill is now the same as the combat knife, and its swipe time to kill is now the second fastest in the game, only losing to the Wakizashi. I found that the Ballistic Knife's projectile and swipe time to kill is the same at 250 milliseconds, which is slower than the Wakizashi, but for some reason the projectile will always beat the Wakizashi in a swipe. It's happened in every single test I've done. I don't know why it does that. It's not supposed to do that on paper. Don't know if you'd ever run into that scenario, but now you have that knowledge in the back of your head. So to recap time to kill, it's been made slower across the board. The Wakizashi got buffed, the Ballistic Knife got nerfed, and I also want to point out that the longer lunging weapons like the Sledgehammer and Machete can have a variable time to kill depending on the distance you are from an enemy. That's why I listed a range for those weapons on that graph. That brings us to our arguably most important stat, range. Some weapons were untouched. The combat knife has only a lunge range, and that's been unchanged since launch, so we can still use that as our base for comparison. The Sledgehammer still has a step further lunge range. The baseball bat still has a step and a half further lunge range. The E-tool still lacks lunge range. Its swipe range is still a step less than the combat knife's. And lastly, the Wakizashi's lunge range is still 2.5 steps shorter than the combat knife's. The first of our secret changes is the Wakizashi's swipe range. It got nerfed. It was the same as the E-tool's range, but it's been changed from -1 step to -2 steps, which is pretty significant. You're gonna have to be closer to an enemy to kill with the Wakizashi now. This also means it can still feel inconsistent because its swipe range is further than the lunge range, but not as much as it was before. Melees where you think there should have been a kill but nothing happened shouldn't be happening as much with the Wakizashi now. So it did get a nerf, but also kind of a buff depending how you look at it. This rework also introduces some counterplay between the E-tool and the Wakizashi that we'll come back to after we go through the rest of the changes. The ballistic knife straight up got nerfed. Its swipe range is now a step and a half shorter than the combat knife, where before it was the same as the combat knife. And its lunge range has been greatly reduced. Before it was 1 step shorter, now it's a whopping 2.5 steps shorter. That kind of sucks, but it does make sense to nerf the ballistic knife along with the Wakizashi, because before the nerf, the Wakizashi and the ballistic knife shared the same range stats, and that remains the case after these nerfs. I've saved the biggest change for last, the Machete. Its original lunge range was 4 steps further than the combat knife. You'll notice that my operator's head was aligned with the spike on the screen. Now the Machete's lunge range is plus 7.5 steps, almost double its original range, making the Machete the only melee weapon to get buffs across the board in these hidden changes. Now, does all of this change the melee meta game? Surprisingly, no, not really in my opinion. The only real change I feel is that I'm more comfortable saying the E-tool is better than the Wakizashi now. The E-tool has longer reach range, and if you can go without the lunge, it is 100% the clear choice. The Wakizashi has its faster swipe time to kill, but it also has less reach range than the E-tool. So if you can stay within optimal range, I know it's hard to do in fast-paced multiplayer, but hypothetically, the Wakizashi's faster swipe time to kill doesn't really matter because the E-tool has a longer reach and a faster time to kill than the Wakizashi's lunge range. The Sledgehammer is now definitely the worst melee weapon out of the group, and the combat knife isn't far behind. As for the Machete, it's most definitely stronger now, but I don't think it makes it as good as the Wakizashi or the E-tool. Still, people who are a fan of the Machete lunge are going to love it even more now, which I've seen expressed in comments of multiple of my videos. But while I was going for gameplay in this video with the Machete, I still found myself getting frustrated because I got killed mid-lunge quite often with the Machete. The Wakizashi and the E-tool don't have as much room for error that's out of your control because they don't have insane lunge ranges. But as I've done in my worst to best episode, I'd still recommend the Machete over all the other melee weapons. If you haven't seen that worst to best video, my rankings are still the same in that, and it's a great video that explains why each of these melee weapons are better or worse than one another in a easy to digest format. But what are your thoughts on these hidden melee weapon changes? Will you be trying out a new melee weapon? Do you even think these changes were necessary in the first place? Let me know what you guys think down below in the comments. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you hit that like button, consider subscribing, and if you'd like to help support the channel directly, there are some links down below in the description that you can check out. Peace.